In a world filled with doubters and challenges, my strength shines through, radiating like a beacon of resilience. Type 1 diabetes may be a part of my life, but it does not define my limitless potential. It is within the depths of adversity that true heroes emerge, and you, my friend, are a hero in your own right. Type 1 diabetes may present its own set of challenges, but it is through these very challenges that you discover the boundless capacity of your inner strength. With every finger prick, every instant dose, and every meticulous decision, you showcase the determination and resilience that sets you apart. Welcome to United by One.
Welcome everybody to the show, Pwz WON Sports. We have a very special guest today, Jack Purcell. What's going on?
Hey guys, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining
us. Amigo, compadre, introduce yourself. Let everybody know what you do. Tell everybody what I know you do so good. And just give like a little intro about yourself.
Yeah. Well, I'm not the Converse sneaker, but I'm working towards that. Sneaker. And I have a funny story about I used to date women and fool them into thinking I had my own line of sneakers. But what most people probably know me for is my work at DC Comics. I was what they call an inker and a quote unquote finisher for DC Comics. Worked for them for about 12 years. I've worked for Marvel, Disney, Image. I've done ad work for Best Buy, but I've been able to really tap into another one of my passions, which is professional wrestling. And when I'm here talking with you great people, so I've been doing a lot of work for companies, some of the top companies in the Northeast, like Blood, Sweat, and Tears, like Pro Wrestling Grind, like Blitzkrieg Pro. A lot of individual wrestlers done some cool t-shirt designs and merch artwork. So it's been great. It's like, how much better does it get? I get to draw comic books and superheroes, or pro wrestlers, sorry, comic book superheroes, pro wrestlers. I've even done my own creator-owned graphic novel called Malice and Mistletoe. I've gotten to work with Stan Lee. So I checked off like all the boxes, because my original intention of getting into comics was to work on Batman, and I got to do that. And then the one that I just felt like probably wasn't going to happen, so I didn't really tell anybody, was I wanted to work with Stan Lee, and that somehow occurred. So I can die a happy man having accomplished those two goals in the world of comics.
It's like a childhood dream, really. I mean,
so awesome
working with somebody like Stan Lee.
I told the man introduce himself, and he just goes, "I've worked for Disney, I've worked for Marvel, Batman, Stan Lee, oh, that guy." I love it. Jack, you're the fucking man. Yeah, I'm dropping the first one today because that was great.
Nice.
Jack, I've known you, give or take, about 2 years now?
That's right, yeah.
Roughly. Every time I see you, it's always an absolute pleasure. We always have a great time, and we just shoot the shit and talk professional wrestling, because it's the one thing that we both, besides Batman, love so much.
And Fortnite.
And Fortnite. Oh, by the way, I'm done with that thing. Like, I'm well past the tiers. Like, I'm in the 218s, I think.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I went a little. I got sick like a week ago.
No.
And I was home. I couldn't go to work, whatever. So what I do, I just grinded.
Right on, brother.
Mission building. I can't wait. Did you hear the news?
The season 1 island?
Yeah. I can't wait. Me and you'll talk a little more about that later once,
definitely.
Once Dad goes away. What's
I'm
up,
down.
Rick?
Wow, that's unbelievable. So we're here. We can talk about a lot of different things, obviously.
Whatever you want.
Yeah. And let's talk about a little bit of professional wrestling. Obviously, Next week, there's a gigantic show coming up November 11th, United by One, which is you're a very big part of. Harry is, holds this little part in the show as well. So it's a tiny bit. Obviously, the company that I do work with, Coliseum Pro Wrestling, has a match featured on it, and some of our talent is also featured on the show. So I'm really looking forward to that. Harry, go for it.
So, okay, going back to the initial 2-year conversation, every time we get together, we talk, we shoot the shit, we talk about professional wrestling. We'll start off with, how did you get into wrestling? What brought you in? Was it a superstar? Did you watch a certain show, cartoon, whatever? How did you start watching this great thing we love called professional wrestling?
Yeah, it's weird that I didn't get into it until I was about 16 years old, oddly enough. I don't know how I hadn't gotten into it sooner, but I had some friends who'd gotten into it, and they were telling me about guys like, Ricky Steamboat and King Kong Bundy, and it all sounded really colorful and interesting, and like the kind of stuff I was into in comics. So I remember the very first match I watched was Ric Flair versus rugged Ronnie Garvin in a steel cage.
Bro, you're speaking this is me right here.
Go ahead.
You're speaking my language here. I was a huge NWA fan growing up. I loved it when Garvin won the NWA title from Flair. I popped. Like that was and I got to tell you, it's like a lot of people look at that as like a dark period for the NWA. Like, why did they give that title to him of all people? Is because he was willing to put up the money. At the time, he had to put down it was $150,000 deposit on the belt or something like that.
Oh my God.
Yeah, well, that was the way the NWA wanted to make sure that they got their belt back. So,
hey, Jack, you want to be the BST champion?
He's got
to take out a loan.
Got $150,000 check, and we'll talk about it.
Okay, I'll start hitting the gym again.
That Ronnie Garvin was one of my favorite wrestlers growing up. I loved the Hands of Stone, and of course, later on went to WWF to become a rugged Ronnie Garvin as well.
Yeah.
Short stint in Memphis in the AWA in between that as well.
No pun intended. Yeah, he was man, talk about a guy with heavy hands. I'll never forget the first chop I saw him hit Ric Flair with. I just couldn't believe it. I'm like, whoa, like I've heard people refer to this as fake. Like that must have like left a hole in this guy's chest. And I didn't, of course, realize how immortal Ric Flair was at that time, but I soon learned. And that match got me sucked in. Like I really got into the whole NWA thing and Ric Flair and then the Four Horsemen. That was kind of my entry level into it. And then got into WWE.
Hell of an entry level.
It was awesome.
I know, right? I know.
Yeah.
Did you grow up here in the Northeast? Because that's my other, really? Because I mean, we're in the backyard of the WWE, so it's very rare that someone really discovers the NWA first in a way.
Yeah, right. No, it was weird. And I mean, I grew up in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is in Western Mass.
It's not too far.
No, it's not far at all. I have a funny story about Titan Tower too. Luckily, no arrests were involved, and I have a few close calls.
Are you trying to apply for a job, basically?
Sort of, yeah.
I love it. I got a Titan Tower story. No arrests were involved. No need to worry.
There were police present, but they weren't picking me up, which was a good thing. But I remember after realizing that I loved pro wrestling, I went to my first house show, and it was WWE. And I'll never forget, it was the British Bulldogs defending the belts against the Hart Foundation and Rowdy Roddy Piper versus Bob Orton. And
that's awesome.
Unbelievable. When I saw the British Bulldogs, I was like
86, 87.
That's exactly right. 86.
80. Okay. So that was right around, obviously Piper's face turn, right? Orton was still turning heel, the Bulldogs. Yeah. And they had one of their best rosters at that time. The tag team division was stacked.
Unbelievable. Totally stacked. Totally stacked. And again, I think we could talk a lot about tag team wrestling. And I think tag team wrestling right now is just like,
Let's talk about tag team wrestling. I love this. Let's do this. Let's talk about tag team wrestling. How far do you want to go back? Do you want to talk current stuff?
We can talk about wrestling. This is an open platform. I mean, we have a guest here. They can talk about whatever the hell they want.
Tag team wrestling. Who's your favorite tag team all time?
All right. I'm going to just say this, and I know I'm annoying about this. My kids think I'm annoying. I'm terrible about favorites, but I could tell you some of my favorites. I don't know if I can really narrow it down to one. But I just had Culture Inc. on my podcast, and they were, I mean, I remember seeing them 2 nights in a row recently. I saw them against the Shook Crew at Wrestling Open, and the next night saw them against Main Event at Pro Wrestling Grind. These guys.
I gotta get up there. I gotta get up there one of these weekends. Grind is putting on such an incredible product.
Yeah. Oh my God. Main Event is another team who I love, and I love seeing them get some shine on MLW.
They deserve it.
They do. I mean, they really are outstanding. I love those guys. Miracle Generation, another team who, like, one of my favorite tag team matches that I almost mentioned to you when we were talking earlier. But Miracle Generation had a match against Becca and Aaron Rourke at Wrestling Open that was mind-blowing.
And it was such an incredible match that almost the fact that it was technically an intergender match kind of just blurred away. And no, I'm not trying to get at you, Rick, but Becca definitely held her own against 3 guys, and I'm not trying to take anything away from Becca. I think Becca can hold her own with everybody that's out here in the Northeast, but there are always those people that'll look at it from she's a woman, and she absolutely stole the match, if I'm being completely honest. And I'm not trying to ruffle your feathers, Rick.
No. I was having this discussion because obviously, Jack, I don't know if you've heard my rants about this ever at all. I strongly dislike intergender wrestling. I dislike a lot of gimmicky wrestling, death matches, and watching. But I was watching, what's it, Jay Strongbow and what's his face in a shark cage match where it was like 3 feet wide the other day. So, but whatever. But intergender wrestling really does ruffle my feathers. But I
definitely, I think of you as more of a purist.
I just like traditional, old school style wrestling. That's what I grew up on, and when somebody like, say, China wrestled Jericho, it was a little bit more believable, I guess. And you know what I mean. And I mean, at that time, she was, huge.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
I mean, if we're really being honest, like Becca and Dustin Waller, they're pretty. Yeah.
Waller's very small.
He's like, don't get me, like, I'm not even trying to insult Waller.
No,
he's getting bigger, but he's always been a thin guy. So, like, they kind of like offset each other, and then Kylon and Rourke would offset each other.
Right.
If we're talking about comparisons here. And I think that's also why it made it more believable, because Becca looked like she belonged there. She absolutely belonged there.
100%.
Stole the show.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, Becca, who I'm actually debuting a trading card of this weekend, she had a match against Marcus Mathers that really tore the house down at Grind. And again, there wasn't really, and I understand, Rick, where you're coming from. I totally get it. And I'm not a big deathmatch guy either, aside from Dr. Redacted, who I think kind of goes beyond a lot of those types of matches. But I just thought that match, I stopped thinking about gender completely. It left my mind. It was just an unbelievable, nonstop back and forth match. And I really wasn't thinking about intergender. And so I think that's where that type of matchup can transcend what could be a limitation.
If you can get lost in it and stuff like that, then it's, I'm trying to see how to word it without coming off like sounding ridiculous, but I guess if you can get lost in the match, then that kind of speaks for itself, really, in a way.
You get lost in the magic.
Yeah, because it's like, I mean, I was discussing this with a friend before, and I was discussing how Harry was trying to ruffle my feathers last week with the question, and it was talking about how when Brian Cage wrestled Tessa Blanchard, and I thought that match was actually very good. However, Cage was just towering over Tessa, and her facials were not believable enough. However, it still held its own as a very good match.
There are a few women out here who can blur that image, who can definitely catch you with the magic, and Becca is definitely one of those women. And going back to tag team wrestling, that was an absolute heater that night. And also Wrestling Open had produced some tag team wrestling not too long ago that we ran the rematch not too long ago at Mega Clash, but Miracle Gen versus The Haven from Summer Stunner about a year ago, and I think that I like that match so much only because I know all four of those men on a different level. They're not just, I'm not just fans of the wrestlers that are wrestling, and these are now some of my friends and peers in this thing we call wrestling, and seeing them absolutely tear the house down and knowing how proud they are now, because even a couple of weeks ago, Rick and I were talking with them, and all four of them can talk about that match, you know, like it's their favorite one that they've had on a personal level.
That match of Blood, Sweat, and Tears was really unbelievable. That was hard hitting too.
That I multiple people have said it. I will say it as well. It's probably the best tag team match we've had ever. They can definitely, you know, take a bow for that. As far as like favorite tag team match like all time, I don't know. You said you have a hard time with favorites here. Do you have a match that you would go? Do you have like a go-to tag team match? Like if you really wanted to like just get into it?
Yeah, you know, I think what I could do is tell you what I think, because they fought numerous times, and I would just say the combination that I think I could go to every week and enjoy every single time they fought, whether it was 2 out of 3 falls or 1 fall, was FTR against Alpha Academy. I remember taking my son to his first wrestling house show, and oh my God, NXT house shows were off the charts, and that tag team match blew me away. It was nonstop. And then of course they went on to fight in Takeover and you know, numerous other house shows. That matchup was absolutely incredible, and for me that elevated FTR into one of my favorite teams, which, you know, they had a match against, I guess, what do they call them, Bullet Club Gold. That was another match where I just
Jay White and Juice Robinson. The hour match.
Awesome.
Beautiful stuff. Match. FTR is one of those teams that have had nothing but beautiful tag team wrestling for the better part of 10 years.
Yeah, they're amazing.
They remind me of, you know, they're a throwback, and it might sound cliche, but they always remind me of Tully and Arn.
Right.
But that's the comparison.
Who are my absolute favorite tag team of all time. Like I am a Tully and Arn fan, like all the way.
FTR and the Alpha Academy is almost like a modern day Horseman versus Steiners.
Yeah, right. Definitely.
I think that's the best. I think that's the fairest comparison I can give it. And I would hate to hear that they don't approve of it, because I think that those are two teams from that era that were perfect for each other as far as like tag team wrestling goes. Machine Guns, the Motor City Machine Guns. How even now, because they started together at maybe 06, 07 of the 2000 era, and are still going strong today, still holding it down. Teams like the Rascals, I can name tag teams all day. Rascals, the Gun Club alone have been like absolutely killer. If you're watching TV now and you know you want to watch outside of FTR, what you just said, like on WWE, who are you looking for as far as tag team goes?
In WWE?
Yeah.
Oof. God. I mean, I love New Day.
Okay.
I wish there were more tag teams in WWE, because, you know, I again kind of go back to what we referenced earlier, that first house show. That era was so stacked with tag teams. There weren't just two dudes thrown together. It was like specialists.
You had legitimate tag teams.
Legit. Like when even, you know, again, I'm going back to Blood, Sweat, and Tears, but one of the best tag team matches I ever saw was also at a Blood, Sweat, and Tears show at that amazing brewery outdoors. It was Marcus and Dylan versus Main Event.
Yeah.
That was really an incredible. It exceeded what I thought it was going to be. I mean, Main Event, I'm always a huge fan of, but I didn't know what to expect with that match. I kind of just thought, hey, it's a Main Event match. It tore the house down. And I mean, I love tag team wrestling, but it has to be for me, specialists like who know each other. Main Event are a great example. Culture Inc. are another great example. Miracle Generation, The Haven. I mean, there's so many I could go on about, but I feel like WWE is tough for me because for me, it was a completely unwatchable product for years. It got to the point where I really wanted to love it. And I had a podcast about wrestling where I'm like, I'm finding it hard to talk about WWE because it's so horrible. But over the last year, it's kind of come back to what I would consider to be the repair phase, where now like we're getting it back. We've got some strong stuff going on. But I mean, New Day is always one of my favorites. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name. Viking Raiders, is that what they're calling them now?
Formerly War Machine. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, War Machine. That's how I almost said War Machine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, love those guys. They were unbelievable. So WWE, like they've got so much incredible stellar talent and they've squandered it for so long that for me it's like hard to see. And now allowing myself to kind of buy into them, rebuilding them has been phenomenal. Even like Nikki Cross, who I loved in NXT, but then main roster, I was like, oh, it's so embarrassing. Like you're squandering talent like this. And now she's kind of back. I'm like, oh, I'm invested again. I feel good about that because I want to love WWE. But for so long, it's been like, oh, I wish it was 1988 again. And I'm not a big nostalgia guy, but I longed for those days where it was WrestleMania 3.
It's crazy.
You just mentioned 1988. I went through the entire year of WWF TV and binge watched the entire year in 1988. Probably up until about 2 weeks ago, I finished it. Now it's starting in 1989.
Wow. Oh wow!
And the roster is just. We were talking about Ron Garvin before. Ron Garvin made his debut in the company around that time period, probably towards the end of the year, and he fought Mike Sharp. And we're talking about heavy chops. The two of those dudes chopping each other, it was just sick. Iron Mike Sharp, known as like a preliminary guy mainly, but it was just insane. Sorry, I know I interrupted the question talking 1988. You got me all excited because
this is what we're here for. We're here to talk about wrestling, but I find it funny. One of Jack's favorite tag team matches is a tag team match from the company that he couldn't watch tag team wrestling about, and that's because at the time the tag team wrestling on the main roster wasn't the same as the tag team wrestling on NXT. NXT, you had those legitimate tag teams like in American Alpha, Blake and Murphy, the Vaudevillains, FTR, the Revival at the time, DIY, just to name a few. And it's so crazy. Like once these guys transitioned to the main roster, they weren't used as beautifully as what Hunter was doing with them. And now you almost see like the revitalization of tag team wrestling slowly but surely in the Hunter era. And I'm actually very happy about that because tag team wrestling is my favorite form of wrestling, if I'm being honest, because it's one-on-one times two, if you think about it. And it's just more action, more fun, moving parts. If you were to ask me in the 90s who my favorite tag team was, Demolition all day.
Oh yeah.
Here comes the Ass, here comes the Smasher, here comes Demolition, Walking Disaster. There you go. Pain and Destruction is our middle names.
That's right.
Like those were my teams. Like it wasn't until like later in my wrestling love that I started falling in love with teams like the Fabulous Rougeau brothers. Teams like the Rockers, obviously, Shawn Michaels, Mark Jannetty, Hart Foundation, Legion of Doom, so on and so forth. Now, so you're into it in the NWA era, like Ronnie Garvin, 87, 86, going further. Was that like a continuous thing for you? Or were there moments where like you were like, I can't watch this anymore, and then you saw something else and you're like, oh, I'm back? Like, how was wrestling for you throughout the years? Was there an off period? And then what brought you back, if there was?
Yeah, that's a big question. Because I was kind of all over the place just because of life, really. I remember, the NWA stuff got me going. And then I remember seeing Sting and Ric Flair and all these matches that, blew me away. But I could never see the live events. I wanted to go see it in person. I wanted to feel it, and WWE was the only real option. I didn't even really know about indie wrestling at the time. So for me, it was just ignorance. Like what I knew was WWE. So that's what I went to go see. And I learned to love it. I was front row for all the shows that were near me. I was at SummerSlam 88, the very first SummerSlam at MSG, and hearing the pop for the Ultimate Warrior when he beat the Honky Tonk Man in 30 seconds. I'll never forget that. I was like, whoa, like, can I do this? Like, I'd like to be part of that. And I remember thinking with some of my friends, like, I wonder if we could do this. Because, we were like average size guys, but we thought, like, I don't know, we're like young dudes with too much testosterone. So maybe we could do it. and so we started doing like backyard wrestling types of training. And we started going to shows where Killer Kowalski used to have shows that he'd run in this area. And he had one at a place called Mountain Park. It's on Mount Tom in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and which has a huge boxing and wrestling history. So I went to some of those shows, and guys like Triple H had come up there. Edge, I think, was another guy.
This was the IWF, by the way, that was his promotion, the International Wrestling Federation that Kowalski ran. Right.
Yeah. And I just got dumb luck, ran into a lot of people who were willing to share a lot of wisdom and time with me, and picked up as much as I could. And probably luckily for me, ended up getting hurt training, just because not having a real trainer and just trying to figure out how all this stuff works. Got dropped on my head. A guy who couldn't hold me for a pile driver almost broke my neck. So so I have a permanent neck injury thanks to that. So I was like, hey, you know what? This isn't for me. I'm safer behind the drawing table. I'm just going to enjoy this from my front row seat. So that was a brief period of thinking I could be part of it and realizing that wasn't the artistry for me. But yeah, I stuck with WWE for quite a while. And even when it got really gimmicky and cheesy, and I dropped out briefly when I was in college. I lived in Boston for a few years, and just had other situations like girlfriends and running and trying to figure out a career and all this stuff in college. So
situations like
right, like all those things in life that get in the way of some of your pro wrestling. But I remember going to see the very last show at the original Boston Garden, the last pro wrestling show, and that kind of revitalized me. Like when I went there and saw that, I remember I got introduced to some guys who I didn't know that well, including Hunter Hearst Helmsley, the Blue Blood. Ooh. And I remember going with my friend who kind of was into wrestling, but I dragged him along and told him how great it was going to be. And I remember Triple H, or Hunter Hearst Helmsley at the time, coming out, and he was fighting a preliminary wrestler. And I remember he kind of appeared sloppy to me. He even tripped at one point, almost fell on his face. The crowd was laughing at him. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what's this guy doing? Like, who let this guy in the ring? And little would I know, of course, what he would become. But yeah, Kevin Nash was there, and it was just star-studded and awesome. And that kind of got me back in it more regularly. And I've always kind of stuck with WWE. I love AEW. Again, when WWE was purely unwatchable, AEW, I was like, this is what I'm looking for, because I was into the indies. I would be at the indie shows as much as I could. And then AEW came along, was exactly what I was looking for. It was the kind of wrestling that I was into. And then, again, like with the indies, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Blitzkrieg, Pro Wrestling Grind, Wrestling Open Beyond, I just got into everything. I tried to watch as much as I could, and I still am, as much as I possibly have time for. But Rick, kind of like in a similar way to yourself, there are certain things that I struggle with, like death matches. I'm not into death matches. Okay. I find them just to be, and Lewis and I talk about this a lot, but the idea that you're ever gonna get better than some of the stuff Mick Foley did, that you're ever going to shock me more than some of that. And like I just don't want to even be in the building when you're breaking those big light bulbs on people's heads. Like, I'm just not looking to die young. I want to see my kids become adults. Like, I don't want to breathe that shit in. But there's guys like Dr. Redacted, to me, who are real artists and who elevate it to a different level. Like, when that guy's on a show, I'm interested. Other than that, there's not too many death matches for me that are appealing. I also just think, like, having probably, like most guys, been in a few real fights, like, real violence isn't entertaining to me. It hurts, and it's not comfortable to watch for me. But pro wrestling is a nice combination where it's artfully done. And I find a lot of death matches are just, guys who are out of shape, who, are who want to hurt somebody without getting arrested. So they're in these fights to, cut somebody with, a pizza cutter or whatever it is. That's not entertaining to me. Except, but there's always those few guys, it's like in Star Wars, right? Like the Siths speak in absolute. So I never want to sound like I'm speaking like that, but there's always exceptions. But that kind of stuff, I have a really hard time finding entertaining.
It's not for everyone. And like, I have my love with deathmatch wrestling, but it goes way back to when it became more of like what we're seeing now. I was a deathmatch guy maybe in like the early 2000s, right when my love for indie wrestling started. It was like deathmatch wrestling, then it was like Ring of Honor.
It was still shocking at that time period, though. Like, now
yeah,
it's like everything's been overdone. But I mean, are you gonna the difference between like guys like Mick Foley knew how to put it together artfully in a way,
because he was a professional wrestler first.
Exactly. He knew he wasn't a very good professional wrestler. But then he needed a way to get the fans into him, and he would just do ridiculous things like being thrown out onto the concrete, and then it just got, over time, it just got more and more and more. I mean, there's not going to be guys like the original Sheik or guys like that like innovated it. It's once it became a normal thing in professional wrestling, it just kind of went away. Like, it just was like not that interesting, or it's just the thought of each match, they try to outdo each other by doing things like sticking a needle in someone's
like stuff lower like that is a little
region, private parts. It's just stuff like that. It's just like, I don't want any part of that kind of stuff.
No.
I like, so going back to the early 2000s, XPW was like a major thing. I don't know, Jack, I don't know if you've heard of XPW, like the original incarnation.
Back in the day.
Yeah. If you go to like a Sam Goody or FYE, you'd see like the Revolution will be televised, and you got Shane Douglas and like Chris Candido on the cover, and you're like, oh shit, Shane Douglas, Chris Candido, gotta pick this up. And then next thing you know, you got like a guy named Supreme and a guy like the Messiah smashing light bulbs and barbed wire on each other. And like, this is not what I was expecting. But yeah, that's just my little talk about deathmatch wrestling. I can watch it to an extent, but it's not my major cup of tea anymore.
And I mean, I think there's room for all of it. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm the last person to want to censor anybody from trying to be creative, but it's like, there's just like, I'm not into Westerns. Like, I don't give a shit about like Westerns. I don't care how good they are. I mean, Mandalorian, like, it's kind of a Western. I like that, but it's tough for me. Just personally, there's certain genres that aren't interesting to me. And there's always exceptions, and I like the exceptions.
Right.
But for me with pro wrestling, like if I want like stuff like Rick, like you were just describing, like I'll rent Faces of Death. Like when I was a kid and saw that, like that's cool. Like if I'm
used to get that. Me and my buddies on the weekends used to go to the video store, rent those, and just be like, what the hell's going on?
That's right. Right. And it was fascinating, right? Because it was a train wreck, and that's what you wanted. Like for pro wrestling, like, I mean, I've gotten to know a lot of these guys. Like, I don't want to see these guys get permanently injured, so I'm not looking for it. I want to see them be entertaining and hit hard and all that stuff. But ultimately, I want them to be able to move on and go see their family.
Right.
So you are a fan of independent professional wrestling. And I think we all are too. Rick has his little stuff going on with CPW. I have my little thing with BST. What was your initial introduction to independent professional wrestling?
My best friend's father, who we refer to affectionately as the General, was like a super old school wrestling guy. Like he'd be the kind of guy you bring to a WWE show and he's yelling, "Break it off," really fun, like old school guy who grew up in Holyoke. He was going to the matches back then. He would talk about, Gorgeous George and all these guys who he loved. So when he found out I was interested in wrestling, he's like, "We should go." So I would take him to the WWE shows. And then, after that, I guess it was probably, late 90s, maybe early 2000s. I'm sorry. as an artist, time's kind of an abstract, but I took him. He found out that Greg the Hammer Valentine and the Honky Tonk Man were going to be at a big time wrestling show. And so I went to this big time wrestling show because he wanted to see these guys from WWE who are now like, nearing retirement. But I got to see a lot of the indie wrestlers and I got really interested in them. I'd see guys like Facade and
yes,
a lot of guys who we still see, guys like Christian Casanova, who of course went on to be the champion in NXT. But guys like that, the JT Dunn. So I started getting to know some of the indie wrestlers and really liking them. And I didn't expect that. I didn't really go to see those guys, but they're the ones who I walked away remembering and trying to forget that Greg the Hammer Valentine looked like his hand was so arthritic he couldn't ball up his fist. And that was just sad for me because I loved seeing him back in the day in WWE. But that was really kind of what galvanized me to investigate indie wrestling a little bit more, and then getting to know those guys and thinking like, oh wow, this is cool. So I could picture this guy in NXT or this guy in whatever WWE, whatever it might be, and then getting to see that transition happen. It was, to me, fascinating. The whole culture of pro wrestling is fascinating, but to see what that transition can look like for somebody to go from the indies and then what they might become on a televised wrestling show.
Yeah. So okay. And I get that. I get that to a heavy level, as I've talked with Rick at nauseum at this point. Like my marquee, quote unquote, love for Ring of Honor. And that, I've been following them since its inception. So seeing guys like AJ Styles, Amazing Red, Samoa Joe, CM Punk, so on and so forth, go from this little gym to like this huge, like mega power called Ring of Honor it's absolutely crazy. And it's so cool that now I'm kind of seeing it in a different way with guys like Dustin Waller and Kylon King and Ichiban and Lucas Chase and Andy Brown, Bobby Buffet. Seeing those guys start up, doing their thing at one point, and now they're taking over the globe.
Right.
Like right now, the Miracle Gen are heading to, I think they were in Canada last week.
Yeah.
Yep.
And are heading back to Canada next week.
Oh, cool.
Wow.
And it's just like they're they just came back from California. Rip Bison was just in Japan, or is still in Japan.
Still there. Delmy was in Germany.
Yeah, Delmy was in Germany for WXW along with Ava Everett. Like it's just it's just seeing these guys who you were a fan of, still are a fan of, but now you're seeing them from different light, just become larger than life, so to speak. And that's always awesome. So big time wrestling was your introduction into indie wrestling. From that time, who has been like your biggest like oh man, I remember that guy, now look at him now?
I think Facade is one of those guys, because like I had seen him and then I don't want to say forgot him, but I just kind of he wasn't at the forefront of my mind, but then seeing him, I ended up working with him, creating a piece of artwork for him through this other company I was doing some work for. And then seeing him against Brian Cage in AEW, having that match on TV was just awesome. I'm like, wow, look where this started. Like me seeing him in this Chicopee, Massachusetts gymnasium, to seeing him on this
national
gigantic platform against a guy like Brian Cage, who I think is really underappreciated. The two of them just had crazy chemistry, and it was an awesome match.
You spoke a little bit about your art background,
right?
Talk to us a little bit about that. Let's kind of steer a little bit away from wrestling. Talk a little bit more about Jack Purcell, the artist. You've mentioned Marvel, DC, Disney. Those are just the three main ones. Best Buy, I believe, was another one off the top of my head.
Right.
How did any of those things even become a thing? Like, how did you get to become an artist? Finisher, I think you said, was it
yeah,
finisher?
inker finisher, yeah.
For DC and I believe Marvel as well. How did you work for Disney? Just give us more about your professional background.
Yeah, I mean, the way it happened is that I was obsessed and I don't take no for an answer. So
Sick.
that's
So you're
kind
like
of,
me. Okay.
yeah. No, really, like I relate to your passion a lot. So for me, like my earliest memories are like lying in a giant coloring book of Batman and being really little. Like my earliest memories of crayons and coloring and being like, this is the best, like I could have done that all day. And then just drawing all the time, and eventually just knowing that there was nothing else I wanted to do. Like I would have felt like I had missed my calling in life if I hadn't done it. So I did everything in my power to make it happen. And I never think that I was better than anyone else. As a matter of fact, I think there's lots of people way better than me, but I think I wanted it more and I worked harder than a lot of people. And so I would just, I went to art school, got an illustration degree, was surprised to find out that they told me comic books were a waste of time. Like I thought I was going to be supported there. And they like kind of laughed me out of the room. They're like, comic books, huh? We're drawing toasters for advertisements. And I was like, God, that sounds really boring. Like that sounds like shit work. Like I don't want to do that. Like, and so it was really interesting. I could get into a whole hour talking about that experience, but anyway, I took what I could from it that was positive and didn't change me at all. Like I knew what I wanted to do. And I started working like much like in pro wrestling, the parallels in comics and wrestling are so much the same. So started working in the indies and comics, and would, eventually get some work. Sometimes you got paid, sometimes you didn't, but you'd get published copies of your stuff. So I would send that to DC and Marvel. And ultimately the idea is that if somebody trusts you to do this, then maybe they could. So I started getting like a little more high profile type indies, kind of Ring of Honor level, if you want to compare it to wrestling. And I ended up sending samples because it was like pre-internet. So I was sending like packages in the mail and I was doing it every week. There was never a week I missed. Every single week I would look through the comics, find every name I could, and just busted my ass every single week, like doing the not sexy stuff, like practicing, making tons of mistakes, doing crappy work. But luckily enough of it was good that I caught some people's attention. And I ended up sending work to this guy named L.A. Williams, who grew up in Amherst, which was only half hour or less away from where I lived. And so he invited me for lunch and I went down to the DC offices. A lot of security there, believe it or not. So getting in there was a challenge. But he literally opened the door to me. And one day going down,
Time out. I'm sorry. You said you guys went to the DC offices. Where are these DC offices located?
They used to be in New York. They were always in New York since 1930, whatever, when they started. And only over, I guess, maybe, I don't know, 12 years ago or so, they moved out to Burbank and sort of consolidated because, their movies are so successful.
Yeah.
And that was a great idea. But luckily for me, New York was close enough. And I would travel to New York. And eventually it got to the point I was going down there every maybe 2 to 4 weeks and just trying to get FaceTime with editors. And one time I went down with L.A. Williams and a guy named Bob Schreck happened to come in the office. And I think I made like a fart joke. Like it was dumb. I mean, like I said something, but he found it funny. And he's like, oh, hey, what's your name? And he introduced himself. And I was like, oh my God, like Bob Schreck, like he's a legendary editor in comics. He's a big deal. And as a matter of fact, he invited me to his office. He's like, hey, if you want to come by, I'd love to look at your work. And I was like, yeah. So I went to his office and he was super generous with his time and his criticism. He was as honest as it gets. He hit me hard where I needed it. And after talking, I realized that he was actually the founder of Creation Con, which was like one of the early comic book conventions and the first one I ever went to in Boston. So it kind of came full circle. I was like, you're the guy who created the convention that was my first experience in Boston. And he ultimately ended up giving me my first work. I remember going in there around Christmas time and just thinking, man, like, I really want to make this happen. And he's like, you've been working really hard all this time, and I think you deserve the reward. Like, you're there. And I remember just being like, oh my God, like, I'm here. Like, I made it. And he handed me a full issue of pencils of Green Arrow. And he's like, here you go. Here's your first job. And there it is. Like, I did it. I inked a guy named Eric Battle. We ended up doing a 3-issue run on Green Arrow. And we went from there. And I worked for 12 years on all kinds of different comics. And every editor I would talk to, I would tell them that I wanted to work on Batman. And I'll work on anything you give me and be grateful. But really, if there's anything with Batman, like I want to work on the Batman title. If it's 2 pages, anything, like that's what I'm in this for.
Yep.
And it happened. The first actual published work I did was Batgirl, that in sequential time was actually the 3rd project I ever did for DC, but it got printed first. So it's a long story. It was just the way deadlines work. So yeah, and Batgirl was my first published work.
So
and
just to give you kind of like I don't know if you can see all of this.
Oh yeah, nice.
This is just, just for Jack.
Love it.
Look at that.
I love all that stuff.
This is just my little area. Above me actually is right here is the Batcave, and over here is the villain's lair.
Oh yeah, I see that.
Stuff like that. Batman's my favorite superhero all time.
Well, of course he should be.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
Thanks.
Like who doesn't have Batman as their favorite?
Rick, who's your favorite?
Superman.
Oh no! Oh,
Yeah,
Superman.
This is why me and Mancini are friends, just for the record.
Oh shit! You and Lewis would get along too. Superman. I mean, boy, there's a character you got to work hard to make interesting. But luckily, he has a really cool gallery of supporting characters, which they should use better. Because if this Superman movie sucks as bad as the rest of them did, I don't know what to say. Like, let's forget about Lex Luthor. By the way, let's forget about Lex Luthor.
I've been sorely disappointed with the movies since, say, Superman 2. I will point that out because the only 2 that really matter are those 2. Everything 100%. Else has been complete trash.
We're on the same page.
I will, but no, I don't want to insult you or your industry, but DC does not necessarily have the greatest track record of films and live action films.
Oh, dude, they're. I mean, let's be honest.
Okay,
like nobody, no matter how. No one's going to be insulted by that comment. Nobody thinks.
Well, DC I'm just making.
Even as a fan, outside of Batman movies.
1989 Batman. Everything else is trash.
Oh no. The "you created me, I created you" bullshit is so bad. I mean, that was so embarrassing. When I saw that movie, I was like, okay, first of all, my arms are bigger than Michael Keaton, and I don't believe he could carry a girl and swing. Like, that killed it for me right there. Yeah. And the "you created each other" shit. I mean, come on. Like, that was the worst.
Did he just smack down the 1989 Batman?
So
movie?
Bad. Oh, it's so bad.
For the time?
Oh, come on. It was so bad.
Wow. You're the only person I've second person, actually. There's a kid that I work with on my my part-time gig, and he swears by the Batman. He thinks it's that's
like the new iteration.
Well, it's the Batman. That's the name of it.
Yeah, the Batman,
which I thought was complete trash as well. Sorry.
No, there's certainly merit to that opinion. I wouldn't debate you at all, but I would say here's a really unpopular opinion: is without any doubt, hands down, Ben Affleck's the best Batman. There's no doubt.
Jesus Christ,
he's the best one. The costume and look, and I'm sorry if you saw the Flash movie. I truly am sorry.
I did. I watched that with my son. Not so long.
Me too. I did too, and I regret every minute of it, except the parts with Ben Affleck. That costume. 100% on the money.
I did actually think he was pretty decent in it, and I like the Flash, the character. I didn't think the movie was terrible. I mean,
it's not as bad as some of them.
No.
Michael Keaton is not my Batman.
Let me just be clear about that. Well,
he's a great actor for sure.
He's fantastic.
But I will say this: that Batman movie was the reason I got into Batman, because I was about 3 when I first saw it.
Just say that Adam West was my Batman. We'll just say
there it is. There's the line. It's Adam West, and it's
I grew up in the 70s into the early 80s watching reruns of the 60s Batman series.
Yeah,
there was episodes of that. The Partridge
Channel
Family, the Monkeys,
Channel 11 picks.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah,
there it is. Yep, I would watch them every morning. I had the whole set right there that every once in a while I'll just throw a DVD in and just fill my, like the Batcave and the thing up there. They're from the '66 show.
The only thing that that turned me off from that was years later, as a grown adult in my 20s, was meeting Adam West, and he was the grumpiest MF on the planet.
Yes, he was. He was. Him and Lou Ferrigno.
I've never met Lou, but I know people that have, and said that he was one of those guys that just keeps upping the price depending on what you have, and it's not listed, you know.
Yeah, it's kind of a bully.
So
yeah,
I'm glad I know that now, because like there was a year I think he was doing Terrific Con, and I have a piece up there. It's him and Dick Ward and the Batmobile that I wanted to get signed, and unfortunately he passed away that year. So he obviously couldn't make the appearance.
Right.
And obviously, as a bummed Batman fan, I'm like, dang, that was my only shot. I don't no longer have the shot. But now you guys are like, oh, well, you know, he was kind of a dick. And I'm like, oh, well, now I'm like, maybe I didn't miss out on much.
I just had him sign a TV guide with him on it as Batman from back in the day. And his agent or whatever wanted to up the price. So
it's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy stuff.
Wild.
But yeah, the movies and TV shows that DC's done are garbage. Like, I mean, I don't think anyone's going to debate that. But the comic books, I mean, DC has done some amazing work. And if only the movies would stop trying to reinvent the wheel and take what they have, which is some really great content, some really great stories, and not try to rewrite it, reinterpret it. Like try to be faithful. You don't need to be a purist, but like the idea of like gratuitously changing all this stuff, to me, I just don't understand. Like, why bother? Like, why not just make your own movie with new heroes? But you've got great source material. Use it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember what movie it was or what was I watching. It was I know it was a Batman movie. I want to say it was Hush, and they ended up turning the Riddler into Hush. And I want to say it was one of the animated movies, and I'm just like, I'm watching it because I know the Hush story and how it should be his old best friend from when he was a kid. And when I see this movie, and I'm so excited because Hush is a great character. If they put him as Edward Nigma, I'm like, that's not Hush. This is trash, and they need to stop this. And I'm pretty sure, Jack, you'll agree with me that I don't understand. Like, what was the reasoning for that? Do you know?
Well, there's two things. I think that there's one aspect that makes sense where like you don't want to take the comic like word for word and interpret it in another medium, because everyone who enjoyed the original already knows what happened. So so making some intelligent changes, like Walking Dead did a great job with the comic translation to the show. They took elements and mixed it up a little bit, and it was still intriguing and it was still somewhat true to the source, and that was really well done. But the gratuitous changes are like almost like an arrogant, I know better than them sort of thing. And the truth is they don't know better. And that's been proven now for quite a few years. So we'll see. Like Superman Legacy, I have hope, Rick, for both of us that it's going to be very good, because it is at least in part based on All-Star Superman, which if you haven't read is essential reading. And I hope you'll read it because it's one of the best Superman stories they've ever come up with. Grant Morrison wrote it. And Frank Whiteley, who I think might be the best artist in comics, drew it. So we'll see. And they have a lot of like, kind of odd characters debuting, like Mr. Terrific and Metamorpho, characters who you probably, like myself, listen to little records of, like Metamorpho. So there's hope. I think Superman could actually be one of the best DC movies of the 21st century.
Take your recommendation on that. Yeah. Well, I'm going to investigate this.
Dude, seriously, I think you'll love All-Star Superman. If you don't, I'll buy it from you and give it to someone else, because I think you'll love it.
Okay, so
go ahead. But hold on. Let me, before we move on, Harry. Sorry, we're there's something we were just talking about, how their movies are garbage. DC movies are just god awful. But I'm one that always kind of enjoyed the animated movies and thought that they were way more put together, way better than the live action films, and that they were, I guess, more true to form and more enjoyable. Like, I would sit there with my kids and get everyone that would come out, and we were just like, man, that was so much better than, say, I don't know, Wonder Woman or whatever, the live action film. Something to that effect.
Yeah, they couldn't help but be better, I think.
Yeah, Apocalypse War. Have both of you seen Apocalypse War?
No.
I think that is by far one of the more gruesome DC ones.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah, I highly recommend that if you really want to like tap into like a really darker side of DC. That is definitely it. As far as because we did talk about Batman, but I didn't really is Adam West your Batman? Is that your guy, Jack?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so who is your Batman?
Ben Affleck,
Ben
100%.
Okay.
100%.
So even over Kevin Conroy?
100%. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. The animated stuff, though, to be fair, I can't tell you that I've actually watched them all. The ones I've watched didn't really interest me that much, and it's not that they were bad. I just didn't get sucked in by them. So I'm not trying to,
No, hey, everybody,
that's cool.
You're entitled to like who you like. We're all about free speech here. Like what you like. Look at Rick.
I was about to rip into you about you're about to ruffle my feathers again.
I like everything. You know this, Rick. I'm a very open-minded person when it comes to everything wrestling and comics. And you see how I touched the thumbs up?
I'm still exploring 1970s territory stuff that I haven't discovered yet.
Territories are great. My goal is to bring back the territory age in this.
I'm a video hunter. Like I do. It's one of my favorite things. Is just old school, odd territories that like nobody remembers. Some weird group that would be out in Chicago that probably ran 10 shows for a couple weeks, and then. Oh, look, they had this person on there, and then everybody else is just
for like a week.
Yeah. So
Rick, can I ask you a quick question?
Absolutely, go for it.
Are you familiar with Next Generation Wrestling that's out of Tennessee?
Yes, I do know about it. Yep.
I really like a lot of what they've done. I really like a lot of their stuff. Just throwing it out there because I think some of that stuff
Wrestling out of Tennessee.
It's really great. It
really is. Yeah. I've seen a few of their shows. It's very enjoyable.
See, I love this.
Go look at it, Harry. Go look.
I love this only because like I'm always looking for something new.
See, he wouldn't listen to me if I recommended it, but because you did,
BS,
he will go watch it. Because he's picturing me recommending some like Dynamite Kid type guy, and then I've seen.
I like Dynamite Kid.
Any Dynamite Kid like guy is good.
That's one of my top guys.
He blew me away. I'll never forget the first time seeing him.
If it wasn't for him being such a well, I guess, was it technically his fault? CT, I guess, but Benoit was like one of the top 3 wrestlers for me all time.
Absolutely. Benoit, I usually switch between Dynamite, Benoit, and Arn Anderson as my favorite guys. Like they rotate the top 3.
Benoit.
And there's just times I sit there for an entire night. It's so hard to come by some of his footage now on, say, YouTube. Obviously, you have to know exactly what you're looking for on Peacock to go search for him. I'll sit there a whole night and just watch Benoit. Yeah, I just sat there and watched him against Too Cold Scorpio from Super Bowl 3 a couple weeks ago.
So okay,
yeah, so great match.
Yeah. Rewind. You said Too Cold Scorpio, so now I feel like I need to talk to this before we start wrapping up.
All right, is BST
Too Cold Scorpio is by far like the most ahead of his time wrestler I've ever seen, like ever.
Yeah, he was incredible.
It's so crazy the things he was doing in 91, 92 that are now like extremely popular now in 2023. Jack, do me a favor, lay out all your socials. Where can everybody find you?
All right. Well, first of all, this has been a real joy to talk to you guys tonight. So thank you for thinking of me and having me on. I'm going to be at Rhode Island Comic-Con November 3 through 5 with Orange Cassidy, Darby Allin, and Dr. DMD Britt Baker.